Hello and welcome back to JBCTR and SCC Performance, where today we're going to be polybushing my GR YARIS using a set of Powerflex bushes. Now, when I say we're going to polybush the GR YARIS, this is what we're fitting today. So first up, you've got the front Wishbone rear mount, which is over here. Next up in the engine bay, we've got the lower torque mount, which is the one that kind of stops the engine from twisting. So I think this will probably make quite a big difference in itself. And you've also got the upper engine mount as well, which is this one here. And then lastly, we've also got the gearbox insert. Now I must admit, I've never driven a car that has one of these in, so I'm kind of intrigued to see what this set does to the way in which the GR YARIS handles and generally performs. We're going to start the install with the upper engine mount and the gearbox mount, but firstly we'll loosen the wheels on the ground as we need to remove these later. Once the car is in the air, we can begin by removing the under tray. There's a whole load of clips and a few 10mm bolts, and it's good to see that my engine is still really shiny under the cover. To gain access to the upper engine mount, we need to remove the coolant tank. You may also want to unplug this AC sensor to give you more space. Now, before we touch the engine mount, we need to ensure the engine is supported from underneath. We use the trolley jack and protective padding to hold the underside of the engine. We can now look to remove the engine mount, which has many bolts. Now it took a little bit of wiggling to move it around the AC pipes, but it was finally free. Adding the insert was quite simple, just poke it around the existing mount like so, and lastly use the Powerflex supplied cable tie to hold it in place. And that's it. Now, as you'd expect, reinstalling the engine mount is the same process in reverse. Just remember to torque up the bolts to the recommended specs. And now we're on to the upper gearbox mount. You'll need to remove the airbox, which means disconnecting a vacuum hose, a couple of plugs, and undoing a number of Jubilee clips. Now this thing is absolutely massive, so now we have loads of space to play with. Unfortunately, the ECU is mounted over the gearbox mount, so we need to loosen this off by undoing these two ECU mounting bolts. As with the engine mount, we need to support the gearbox from underneath using a jack, and now we're ready to undo all visible gearbox mounting bolts. Now, unfortunately, there are two bolts underneath the mount which are a little tricky to get to, but it is possible to get to them with a reach around. As you undo the mounts, you may need to adjust the support underneath to ensure the gearbox remains in the correct position. Now, with the gearbox mount free, we can add the Powerflex insert. You'll need to remove the centre bolt, then remove the centre section and its rubber cover. The Powerflex mount can then be placed around the rubber cover and inserted into the gearbox mount. At this point, you may want to add some grease as we now need to replace the centre section of the gearbox mount, which is a rather tight fit with the Powerflex insert installed. Lastly, we need to do up that centre bolt, and that's the insert installed, so we can now get the mount back in the car. So that is everything in the engine bay now done, so we can now lift the car up and finish up underneath. So next up is the rear lower torque mount engine bush, and we're also going to do the front Wishbone rear bushes, and I'll talk to you a little bit more about them when we do them because they're quite interesting. But for now, let's get the car in the air. The torque mount is pretty easy to remove, just 4 bolts at the front and one larger one at the rear, and that's it. Installing the Powerflex insert is equally as easy. Just push it into the existing holes and the torque mount is ready to be reinstalled. Now we can make a start on the lower wishbone inserts. There are a fair few bolts on these, and watch out for this little plate when removing them. Once the wishbones have been removed from the car, the existing rear bushes will need to be pressed out. So now we've removed the rear bush from the front wishbone, we've got a chance to compare the Powerflex and stock. And the most obvious difference is the fact that the hole in the middle is now off center, which means as you adjust this, you can adjust the caster on your car. Now, what caster does is it's responsible for, well, essentially recentering your steering. So if you're driving along, you let go of the wheel, it tends to sort of return to center. By adjusting the caster, you can either make that more aggressive or less aggressive. So we'll be making it slightly more aggressive today. And there's also a little bit of adjustment, sort of like left and right too. So yeah, in general, just more adjustment, which means you can adjust your steering feel. The new wishbone inserts were pressed in, and then we set the casters to maximum, which is recommended by Powerflex. These will be set up more accurately when the car is fully aligned. So there we have it. That is how you polybush a GR Yaris. And unfortunately, we've lost the light, so I'm having to do my intro inside the garage. But I'll let the sort of bushes bed in and stuff, because they do take a little bit of time to bed in. And then I'll do another video showing you, well, my thoughts on how it's changed and hopefully improved the way the GR handles. So yeah, if you enjoyed it, give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more of me, cars and that kind of stuff, feel free to subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one. There goes a sight from my soul.